if we are not addressing the barriers to women's participation and to that of other marginalized people in achieving stable livelihoods, we will not see an end to this cycle of need, if you will, in terms of social protection and assistance. We need to go beyond the cash in hand. All efforts must be accompanied by an analysis that seeks to uncover the root issues affecting the equitable and inclusive participation of these groups, whether it's women, whether it's people with disabilities, whether it's ethnic groups and Indigenous peoples. Um, and we need to then adjust our response to the specific needs identified, the gaps and the barriers that we find, and create more flexible financial products or more flexible digital products that respond to these spaces. So it could be partnering the transfers with skills training. It could be partnering the transfers with digital online training tied to maybe business development services that can enhance livelihood opportunities. And then, of course, more innovative products and access to credit and collateral and things of that nature so that they can acquire productive assets and thrive. So I think it's not just about the cash and the transfer. It needs to be much more holistic, looking at the livelihood opportunities of the people who we hope to influence. And then this thorough analysis would be accompanied by flexibility that would respond to the findings of the analysis, right? So it's not just doing the analysis, but we need to take the information from that analysis and really integrate it into the products that we produce, so that we're not simply digitizing social assistance, but rather we are accelerating progress in women's economic empowerment through the digitization of financial services. So that was just the little flip or reorientation I wanted to flag. Thank you.
Thank you, Liz. Just a reminder to everyone who is attending, please add some comments or questions as we're having this conversation with the panel in preparation for our continued discussion. Isabel, really interested from the private sector perspective, your views on this particular topic.
Thank you. And I think I agree very much with what's been said already, so I won't add to that. We have a lot of research to show the groups that are specifically unconnected, who are least likely to own a phone. We do nationally representative surveys across low and middle income countries that give us a sense of who is connected, and that's done specifically face-to-face so we can see who doesn't even have a phone. To understand that, to understand the gender gaps, the rural-urban gaps as well, and so on. So we've done quite specific research to understand what are the barriers that people face to owning a phone or to using mobile internet. But even before that, we know that awareness is still low. So what I would say is that at the outset, raising awareness specifically with the groups that you hope to include is critical on what mobile internet is, how it could help people, the many, many different life needs that could be used to reach. And I think rather than waiting for a crisis to then try and register people or try and build digital skills, it's thinking very proactively ahead of time. What can we do now to reach those groups that we know are most excluded, to build some of those really basic digital skills? To sign up for a mobile money account or a financial service that could be accessed via a mobile phone. How do we begin to build that trust? The last thing I want to add is that we know from much research that women prefer dealing with women. So this is really critical when you're looking at who is going out to raise awareness, who is teaching digital skills, who is trying to sign people up, whether it's for ID or for mobile financial services or any kind of digital product. It's thinking that women need to see other women doing this, and having a woman representative or having more women agents out there in the field signing people up will make a big difference to how much people will trust your system.
Thanks for that intervention, Isabel. And it really reminds me of some of the earlier discussions in these sessions around the importance of engaging with the user journey. and getting those stories and allowing that feedback from the beneficiaries to inform design. That was the session just before. And the reminder of the communication that Albert also raised, the advocacy.
Okay, that's
Would tie into some of the challenges that even governments in yesterday's session had highlighted around the mistrust of some of the systems, the culture of not fully understanding and having trust in some of these systems to protect the information and to use it responsibly. So thanks for that intervention. The next question is for you, Liz. What does it take to make digitization of social payments a path towards financial inclusion and women's economic empowerment? What are we really talking about here?
That's a pretty loaded question, so I'll do my best to address the issues here. I hope that a key takeaway from the discussions throughout this workshop is the issue of design. How we design our systems, we must take into consideration the differential needs of all people and the intersecting attributes of sex, gender, and age, disability, ethnicity, and so on that perpetuate poverty and exclusion. That needs to be our starting point so that we are sure that we are targeting and addressing the right people. Without intentional planning and execution of these programs, we risk further marginalizing these beneficiaries. And that's something we need to be very mindful from the start. And what are those barriers? Again, going back to that social norms discussion that I mentioned briefly earlier. So of critical importance is how the government and the private sector design these programs. They need to undertake a comprehensive gender analysis from the start so that they can identify those barriers and shape the program to be most responsive to the people that they are targeting. Recognizing things like that have already been mentioned, that the proportion of targeted beneficiaries who possess official forms of identification, those who own or at least can access mobile phones, those who have bank accounts registered in their own names, or even have the financial or digital literacy to make mobile money work for them. We need to be aware of all of these factors and we need to have a response to these. So the digitization of cash transfers and financial services through mobile methods can offer a pathway to change for the most marginalized people. I think that that's very much true, but we need to take a few factors into consideration. So for the pathway of change to be effective, we need to assume that the design and targeting of these programs are informed by an analysis, as I mentioned, on the intersectional dimensions of poverty and exclusion. We need to assume that beneficiaries are offered some choice in how they receive their entitlements, considering mobility and cost factors that affect an individual's capacity to access social assistance in the first place. So, for example, in many OECS countries, and this is going a little bit back maybe from the digital discussion to financial inclusion more broadly, but people with disabilities are referred to in many contexts as shut-ins simply because the existing public infrastructure does not facilitate their ability to move freely outside of their homes. So the cost of public transportation, the availability of public transportation further impacts the ability of people to establish accounts and access services. And given the hub and spoke design of many public transportation systems in the OECS region, the trip chaining is costly and time consuming and often influences an individual's cost benefit analysis as to whether they will seek formal financial services, including accessing the technology that they need in order to make digital payments a reality. We also need to understand or recognize that cash inflow is one of the biggest barriers to women's economic empowerment. And what I mean here relates to the precarious, seasonal, or shift style formal and informal employment that many women, particularly in the Caribbean, rely on in the services sector and the tourism sector. A third of all households are female-headed with multiple dependents, and they, as I said, rely on this precarious employment. These women face daily constraints on their time and their incomes. The digitization of social assistance and financial services offers women the opportunity to make choices about when and how they manage their money and about how they plan their days, remembering the careful balancing act between their roles as productive, paid workers as well as their unpaid care roles. So programs need to reflect the reality of these women and marginalized people. What is the point of a digital or other account if they must cash out their entitlements immediately? So what incentives exist to encourage savings? What complementary services are offered to enhance the livelihood opportunities for these individuals? For example, as I mentioned before, skills training, credit is another area. Prioritizing women and other people who traditionally may not have access to or control over technology or accounts requires an understanding of the social norms and structural barriers that influence their decision making, access to, and control over resources at both the household and individual level. So there's complex interplay to understand how those affect access to and use of digital technology. So creating a regulatory environment that unpacks these social norms and structural barriers is key to influencing women's economic empowerment and is of critical importance actually in the national impetus for economic growth and prosperity. So I think my key takeaway message would be we need to understand the whole socioeconomic climate that is influencing people's access or not, and their choices around how they use financial services and digital technology. And once we can understand that, then we can design products that respond directly to their needs. But we can't see women as a homogeneous group. We must understand the intersectional dimensions of their worlds, and recognize that in the context of the bigger issues of poverty and exclusion within their communities. So thank you.
Thanks for that, Liz. You said a mouthful. And it's a lot easier said than done. And again, kind of also leaning on the digitalization aspect to collect that information is power, because then we can start that process of alignment. I'm quite interested to hear at least a short intervention from CDB around perhaps some of their work. If you are in this space, what are some of the revelations and perhaps the kind of next steps or strategies that you've seen over?
Where you want to take that one? And let me come after.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Albert. I think that one of the other areas that I wanted to add to what Liz was indicating is that not only do we have to consider the issue of design, we also have to remember that a lot of the institutions or organizations that serve marginalized groups or serve the poorest segments of the population are in and of themselves ill-equipped to treat with the various challenges that they encounter on a day-to-day basis, and indeed to sometimes fulfill their mandates. So one of the areas that we at the bank have been focusing on, at least I know through the Basic Needs Trust Fund, is to provide support to some of those institutions to build out their capacities, whether it is in terms of the human resources, whether it's in terms of capacity building, because sometimes we cannot assume that entities that do serve the poorest do understand fully what it takes to reach those cohorts of the population. So it's very important that, yes, we design the interventions, and as Liz would have indicated, it's also important to ensure that those institutions, those agencies that are tasked with supporting these disadvantaged groups are themselves equipped, they have the necessary capacity, and that even we who work with the financial institutions ensure that they also have the requisite financial resources to do some of those things. As I said, it may also include bringing in additional resources, paying for some of the consultancies that are needed to do some of the assessments, or to develop some of the architecture that needs to be put into place to help them to function properly. So those are some of the areas, and these are some of the additionalities that I wanted to bring to the discussion as well.
Thanks for raising that, Laverne, because even as Liz was speaking, and it ties into the next question that I'm going to ask before Elizabeth adds anything else, is, national capacity. What we know to be true is that, they're stalwarts, if you will, very, very committed individuals, sometimes 2 and 3, that are rolling out cash programs and that are trying to, pull all of these pieces together, particularly now at a time when we're dealing with a crisis, right? And an ongoing crisis. So I'm very much looking forward to the discussion that we're going to have, and I invite the governments to speak a little bit on this and on what their needs are going forward, to do that. But before I pass on to the last question, Isabel, I don't know whether you have anything else to add, particularly insights on, mobile use for payments, anything from other regions or even from Latin America and the Caribbean on this. Thank you.
Sure. I think the design has been talked about a lot, so I'm not going to touch on that. But what I would add 3 points, and I mentioned it before, but just raising awareness. Those of us who use the internet are so used to it that we forget that there are people who just don't know it exists. So I'd say, first of all, raising awareness before you need people to use it. And tailoring those mobile digital skills, because that's how people are going to access the internet, or just the basic phone skills that people can operate that. So I'll say that again. The second is collecting gender disaggregated data. We can talk about gender a lot, but then when it comes down to it, you look at the data and you realize that nobody disaggregated it by data, because we're not going to be able to understand the impact and the reach of any social protection systems if we don't know what the gendered uptake is. How are men and women using it? Are they using the services? Are they cashing their money out? What's happening there? And the final one is just to really encourage everybody on this call. No one player has all the answers. So build partnerships with the mobile industry, including mobile money providers and other digital financial services, to leverage existing solutions. There's a lot of really great innovations out there. Could they be tweaked? Could they be made more relevant for the particular context that you want to use them in? Could you use the same platform and make it bespoke for the people group you want to work with, or the particular area you want to work with? So finding that and testing it, getting that feedback. How is it reaching vulnerable groups? Is it meeting their needs? So rather than reinventing the wheel and building a very expensive new system, use what's there. There's super innovations out there. Think about, pay-as-you-go systems for getting internet-enabled phones through mobile money providers or through other digital financial services. Think if somebody can use a phone a little bit, are there videos that could be pushed to them that they could just click on a link and watch something for free? This is how you use this service. Think about using women in awareness raising again, and there's a huge opportunity, I think, for social protection systems to leverage digital solutions to reach much further than you could on a physical one-to-one basis on distributing cash, and to do that to meet the needs of vulnerable groups with dignity.
Thank you for that, Isabel, because you essentially answered the final question that I had, which really concentrates on opportunities for partnerships, particularly that we have in the room, you know, national governments, international organizations, regional and international financial institutions, private sector and other stakeholders, as we embrace some more digital solutions to reach people, ensure that no one is left behind. I wondered whether I see actually hands for Liz and Albert. I think Albert, you had a your hand up.
Yes. Thanks, Juliet. I wanted to come in and make two additional points on the rich discussion that just went ahead. Really important. Let's set the context really by talking about the intersectionality considerations. Really important for this conversation. I want though to introduce two or three other new things, and to make the point that the crisis, the COVID-19 pandemic, has given us across the globe and here in the Caribbean yet another opportunity to have a national dialogue. We are dialoguing now around these issues. It's given us yet another opportunity to really look at the systems that we have in place to see what is working and to see what is not working and to see where there are opportunities to strengthen and enhance and to have synergies across the system with third sector entities, NGOs, and so on. So this is a very important moment given to us, and I think we really need to press ahead with the conversation, which should be solutions oriented. Secondly, I want to make the point that came up earlier, Liz and Laverne mentioned it around those groups or in the third sector that are on the ground working with vulnerable populations in the social protection space. We know in the region in particular that NGOs have an issue of sustainability. And if they're well placed to provide the support, we have to work hand in hand and provide financial resources to them, to provide the necessary requisite training, the capacity building, the consultancy support, etc., so that we can empower them to be able to work with groups in the lower quintiles, which are really struggling at this time. I also want to make the point that we are doing this work, empowering low quintile persons in the lower quintiles to be able to empower themselves, break this cycle of poverty, and particularly intergenerational poverty. And this is where we are bringing these coordinated approaches together to be able to do that. And recognizing, and this is a fact in the region, that our foreign member countries are heavily indebted. There's very tight fiscal space, and there's always that challenge for government prioritizing the priorities, of which one is support to the social sector. And particularly now, with high levels of unemployment as a result of the crisis, and those in the informal sector at the forefront and feeling the brunt, high levels of poverty, which most would have increased. And we know that poor households are headed invariably by women. These are the types of issues that we need to really take on board in crafting the responses to treat with these. So it is about how do our governments provide the additional resources that are required among the competing priorities to address the ongoing needs of vulnerable population groups, persons with disabilities, the elderly, in business, women at home. So I just wanted to wrap those three key points into the discussion to recognize that these also have to be taken into account. It is not easy, but it is going to take that coordinated approach and understanding that the social sector is absolutely important, not only in times of crisis, and social protection is not only associated with social welfare. There are other social protection instruments out there to which the cohort of the population that we're treating with really don't have access. So we have to empower them, build the skills, provide human capital support, and to get them off the welfare roll into the labor market with support so that they can empower themselves and their families and break this cycle and culture of intergenerational poverty. Over.
I hear your points loud and clear, Albert, and very much the need for that coordinated response. One, to better understand and streamline and make more efficient, but two, that link between the shock and the response to that shock, and then that linkage to the training, the livelihoods opportunities that allow for that, the breaking of the cycle of poverty. Thank you so much for that intervention. Liz, I see your hand.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to pick up on a few areas that were mentioned. Isabel, you're absolutely 100% on point with the data collection. We do not have sufficient sex disaggregated data, but I would like to caution the audience that the collection of sex disaggregated data in and of itself is insufficient. So this is where we need to link into what Laverne was saying on capacity building and technical assistance, in that once we collect that data, what do we do with it? How do we analyze it? And how does it then influence our programming? And that's a challenge and a weakness, I think, in many organizations, simply because we don't have enough people and we don't have, therefore, we can't specialize in everything, right? So I think that as long as we commit to the use of sex disaggregated data, then by all means we can collect it. If we don't have a means to process what that data means and how it's going to influence our programming, that's our starting point. We need to start there so that we can develop programs that are effective. I think we have to look at efficiencies, right? We are in a situation now because of the pandemic and many other global events that have placed us in a space where we don't have sufficient bodies, enough people to do the work that needs to be done. In terms of specialized skill sets, we don't have enough resources to do everything that we need to do. But we do have these remarkable comparative advantages and leverage points amongst our respective organizations. And the private sector, the development banks, the UN, the NGOs, the CSOs at the ground level, and the governments, of course, we all have specialized skill areas, and we need to come together and recognize those points of cohesion, if you will, and use our strengths to build programming that addresses the needs and stretches the resources that we do have access to. And I think WFP is a really interesting organization from that perspective because we have a very big footprint on the ground, multiple field offices where others may not have that reach. We have a diversity of partnerships with community civil society organizations as international and local NGOs. And that's where partnering with governments and with CDB and other development banks, with the private sector, there's an interesting interplay that can happen there between all of our respective levels of expertise. And I really think, I hope that from today we will sit down and really start brainstorming around those types of partnerships and where we can better advance our common objectives of bringing digital and mobile money to people who need it the most. And then I just wanted to say one last reflection on COVID-19. And that is, and this is my silver lining of COVID-19, so bear with me if you will, but prior to COVID-19, there was much dialogue on labor force participation and those who were lagging behind and those who had prominent positions and roles. If we are going to recover from COVID-19, we must use our entire population to do so. We must reach out to those who were not empowered to be part of the labor force prior to COVID-19 and use their resources, use their skills, use their talent, and build our economies. And this is an opportunity to really target women's economic empowerment and bring them into the fold and out of the informal sector. So I really see this as an opportunity that's come out of COVID. To build workforces, to build economies again. So please, I encourage you to really assess your situation and see how it is that we can target those who are really on the margins of the productive economy, if you will, and bring them into the fold. That's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Liz. Yeah, thanks for that, especially when we think, I always used to say we need more disaggregated data. And it's not only about the data. As a matter of fact, I think a lot of our countries, maybe if it's even if it's in paper form, we collect a lot of information. It's how do we organize it? How can it be retrieved? And more importantly, how do we use it for analysis and application? So that's a wonderful reminder. Certainly in the Caribbean, WFP is a very operational organization, and it's been a pleasure to work with some of the governments we've been working with to roll up our sleeves and get things done. And sometimes the support is literally something like organizing a form in a more functional way and ensuring that we're collecting that data to boots on the ground, if you will. And it's amazing to partner with the UNICEF and some of the other organizations, whether it's on the policy side and legislative, to kind of standard operating procedures and the like. I do want to take this opportunity to open up the discussion a bit. We have at least another 10 or 15 minutes left of the discussion if we're interested, but certainly I invite the thoughts and perspectives of people working at the national level to this discussion, especially around the partnerships and what are some of those immediate actions that could really move us a lot further forward in those efficiencies, and ensuring that some of the persons who are falling through the cracks, especially those who are in the informal economy, many of them will be women. How do we move that process forward? So please raise your hand or type in the chat any comments or questions that you may have. I do see that Suzanne, thank you, Suzanne, has posted the Global Findex 2021 report, which came out today. And for those who would like a little bit more data on financial inclusion with sex disaggregated, thank you, sex disaggregated information, she wanted everyone to have a look. Thank you, Suzanne. Are there any questions, comments? You can come off of mute. I guess there's been a lot of food for thought. There has been a lot that was said in this conversation that both summarized some of the issues that came up over the last 2 days, but also provides food for thought as we move forward. And certainly, we can definitely take this conversation offline by reaching out to any of the colleagues and seeing how we can unlock some of the challenges raised during these discussions. Well, if there are no other questions or comments, I would love to thank each and every one of you, Isabel, Elizabeth, Laverne, Albert. You've been amazing. Thank you so much for your insights. Thank you so much for your words and your encouragement and your calls for action.